A 13-year-old girl scraped together enough money to buy her adopted dad, an old black man named James Johnson, a beat-up car that looked like it belonged in a junkyard. What they discovered inside that rusty wreck would change all of their lives forever. James Johnson had spent years taking in kids no one else wanted. He was the kind of man who gave everything and got little back from the world. When the old Toyota he used for Uber finally coughed its last breath, James honestly thought his story was over. But his kids weren't about to let that happen. With nothing more than some wrinkled dollar bills and a pile of coins, Sarah, the oldest at 13, and her younger siblings managed to pull together $50. That was just enough to buy a car so broken down, most people would have left it to rot. James climbed into the wreck, planning to strip it for parts, when his hand brushed against something heavy tucked beneath the seat. Wrapped up, hidden away, and gleaming in the dim light, it stopped him cold. The kids leaned closer, hearts racing, as James slowly unwrapped the object. None of them realized it yet, but what he held in his hands would change not just their fortune, but the legacy of their family. Now, before diving deeper into this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It means the world, and it helps us bring more stories just like this. Back to James. He wasn't the kind of man who got celebrated. He never made headlines, never had a mansion, never wore a suit in some high-rise office. His life was quieter, smaller, but no less meaningful. His legacy showed in the footsteps echoing through his modest Chicago home, the children who once had no one, who had been left behind. James took them in anyway. Over the years, he adopted so many that neighbors eventually lost track. Some were black, some white, others Latino or mixed. People whispered behind his back, asking why he kept taking in more when he already struggled to provide. James just smiled. To him, family wasn't about blood or bank accounts, it was about refusing to let kids slip through the cracks. Still, kindness didn't keep the lights on. His one lifeline had been that old Toyota, the car he drove long nights for Uber. When its engine finally died, silence filled the house. Without rides, there was no steady income. Bills stacked up, and the air grew heavy with worry. One evening, James sat on the creaking porch steps, rough hands clasped together, trying to figure out how to keep going. Sarah, his oldest, watched him. She was only 13, but the worry in her eyes made her look older. Behind her, the younger ones whispered, passing coins and crumpled bills from hand to hand. By the time they came forward, all they had amounted to just $50. Sarah clutched the money tight and said with a trembling voice, "Dad gave us a home. Now it's our turn." With that little bundle of cash, they bought a car no one else wanted, a rusted-out shell abandoned in a salvage yard. To strangers, it was junk. To those kids, it was hope. They imagined their dad could strip it for parts, maybe even get it running. When they rolled it into the driveway and told James it was his, he didn't say a word at first. His chest tightened, eyes welling up. He laid his hand on the hood like it was something sacred. It wasn't about the car, it was about the love behind it. These children, once broken themselves, were now giving back with the little they had. Under the faint glow of a flickering porch light, James realized something important: even in poverty, they were richer than most. The car sat in the driveway like a wounded animal, paint chipped down to bare metal, windows clouded with dust, one tire slumping into the dirt. Nobody else would have bothered fixing it. But to his children, that car was proof they hadn't given up on him. Every morning before school, the kids gathered around it. Some wiped its dirty windshield with old rags, others ran their fingers across the hood as if they could polish away its shame. Neighbors passing by shook their heads. Two older men across the street muttered while sipping coffee. "Johnson's wasting his life," one said. "All those kids and now a junk car. What's he thinking?" His buddy chuckled. "Man can't even feed himself. Love don't pay the mortgage." The children didn't hear any of it. Their world was centered on James. They remembered the nights he skipped dinner so they could eat, the mornings he limped alongside them to school, the times he picked them up off sidewalks when nobody else cared. For them, giving up their coins was nothing compared to all he had sacrificed. Sarah broke open her piggy bank. Ethan, just 7 years old, handed over the coins he'd been saving for candy. Sarah gave up the birthday dress she'd been dreaming about, trading it for just a few extra dollars toward the car. When James ran his hand across that rusty hood, he felt every single sacrifice beating inside its metal. He wanted to tell the kids it was too much, that they never should have gone this far for him, but the words got stuck in his throat. One look at their wide, hopeful eyes, and silence won out. So James threw himself into the work. Every evening, after long days spent landscaping, fixing leaky sinks, or doing whatever odd jobs paid enough to keep the lights on, he came back to that car with his toolbox in hand. The driveway became his workshop. Oil and grease smeared across his fingers, sweat stained through his shirt, and the sharp smell of fuel filled the air. The kids gathered close, watching with the kind of reverence you'd expect for a man building more than an engine. He was rebuilding their future. At night, under the flicker of a single work light with moths buzzing around it, James sometimes paused. The fear of failing them clamped tight around his chest. Then he'd glance over at Sarah, cross-legged on the pavement with her notebook, sketching wild ideas of what the car might someday look like. Or he'd hear Ethan whisper to one of his sisters, "One day, Dad's gonna drive us all to the park again." In those little moments, James felt strength return. He didn't see himself as a broken man anymore. He saw kids who believed in him so much they'd emptied their piggy banks and pockets for him, and that was enough to keep him turning the wrench deep into the night. Autumn crept in, the nights growing longer and colder, but James worked through it all, crouched inside that hollow shell of a car. The children often sat in a circle on the cracked driveway, trading stories and laughter while he tinkered under the hood. They didn't realize it, but those hours together were worth more to James than gold, because in those moments, their family was bound by hope, not fear. Then, one evening, everything shifted. James leaned back from the engine, wiping his sweaty forehead with an old rag. Reaching under the driver's seat to grab what he thought was a loose bolt, his fingers brushed against something solid, something that didn't belong there. The air seemed to hold its breath. The steady hum of insects in the dark was the only sound. His hand traced the object again, rough edges, heavy, wedged deep in the seat's frame. Curious, James tugged. It resisted. He pulled harder, grunting until finally it slid free, wrapped tight in layers of oily cloth. It sat in his palms heavier than any car part ever should. Sarah's voice broke the silence. "Dad, what is that?" James didn't answer right away. His chest tightened as he carefully peeled back the grimy cloth. Dust floated into the light, and then, there it was. A dull, yellow gleam. His breath caught. This wasn't brass. This wasn't scrap metal. It was unmistakable. Solid gold. For a long second, James just stared, frozen in disbelief. His mind spun with questions. Was it stolen? Was it forgotten? Who could have hidden it here? His hands trembled as he turned the bar over, the glow of the work light bouncing off its surface. The kids crowded close, eyes wide, reflecting that golden shimmer. One of the younger boys whispered, "It looks like treasure." James stayed quiet. He couldn't force out a word. He felt the weight not just in his hands, but in his soul. Years of hunger, of patching shoes with tape, of choosing which bill could wait another week, all of it seemed pressed into that single bar of gold. The children gasped and murmured with wonder, but James's thoughts weren't about riches. They were about responsibility. Was this a blessing, or was it a test? Across the street, a neighbor peeked through their blinds at the commotion. They muttered to another, that Johnson's always chasing some crazy scheme. Probably just junk he's pretending is worth something. They didn't know. They couldn't know. James sat frozen in the glow of that work light, staring at the bar gleaming in his calloused hands. For the first time in years, he felt the ground under him shift. Life had just changed, but he had no idea how far. That night, the gold bar sat heavy in the middle of their worn kitchen table, its glow cutting through the dim light of their modest home. The children circled around it, whispering as if a wrong word might make it vanish. James sat at the head of the table, elbows resting on the wood, chin pressed into his hands. He hadn't spoken much since carrying it inside. The weight of possibility pressed down on him harder than the gold itself. He'd seen quick fortunes ruin men before, neighbors who stumbled into money, only to fall apart faster than ever. But when he looked up, his eyes fell on the faces around that table. Wide-eyed. Not greedy. Just filled with trust. The Johnson kids weren't asking for riches. What they wanted was a future. The very next morning, James wrapped the gold bar in an old towel and carried it downtown to a pawn shop he trusted. When the appraiser unfolded the towel, his eyes went wide. Under the harsh fluorescent light, he turned the piece over, tapped it, weighed it, and then leaned back slowly. "It's real," the man said. "Pure. You're sitting on a fortune." James's breath caught, but he only gave a quiet nod and tucked the bar back into the towel. He didn't sell it. Not that day. Instead, he walked home through the cool Chicago air, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't about cashing in quick, it was about figuring out how to protect his children and the gift they had uncovered. Weeks went by, and small changes began to ripple through their home. James found discreet ways to convert just a portion of the gold into money, enough to pay off lingering debts, patch the leaking roof, and keep the pantry stocked. For the first time in years, the refrigerator hummed with fresh groceries. The kids came home to meals that didn't have to be stretched thin. But James didn't stop there. He opened a savings account in each child's name, putting in small deposits that would one day grow into something solid. He even sat down with a financial advisor, gripping the pen with his calloused hands as he signed papers that secured trust funds for every one of them. The neighbors started to notice. The once faded Johnson house now had a fresh coat of paint. The porch light stayed on without flickering. The kids wore shoes that actually fit. Gossip floated across fences. Johnson must have found himself a rich donor. Nah, probably government aid. No way he pulled this off himself. James heard the whispers, but never corrected them. Let them talk. The truth wasn't theirs to know, it belonged to his children. Through it all, he kept working. He still picked up handyman jobs, and once the old Toyota sputtered back to life thanks to salvaged parts, he even drove for rides again. He wanted his kids to understand the gold was a blessing, not a crutch. At night, as he walked past their rooms, James heard new sounds filling the house. The scratch of Sarah's pencil as she studied late into the night. The laughter of the younger ones who no longer feared the dark. The soft murmur of dreams spoken out loud. The gold hadn't just filled their bellies, it had given them back dignity, security, and hope. Months rolled into seasons, and the Johnson family's life looked different. Not flashy, not extravagant, but steady. For the first time in years, stability wasn't just a dream. Bills were paid on time. Food filled their shelves. The children walked taller, no longer carrying the shame of being the poor kids on the block. James never forgot where it all began, with a handful of coins scraped together by small hands, and a broken car the world had given up on. That memory sat heavier on his heart than the gold itself. One Sunday afternoon, he stood in the yard, watching his children play tag in the grass. Neighbors gathered nearby, whispering among themselves. Finally, a few admitted out loud, maybe we were wrong about him. That man didn't just raise kids. He raised hope. James's eyes drifted toward the porch, where the old car still sat. He hadn't scrapped it. Instead, he left it right there as a monument, rust and all, a reminder of the moment his children believed in him more than he believed in himself. When curious people asked about the sudden change in his family's fortunes, James just smiled and said, it wasn't the gold that saved us. It was love, the kind you can't put a price on. For his children, that lesson sank deeper than any inheritance. They saw with their own eyes that miracles don't always come wrapped in light. Sometimes, they hide under broken seats in forgotten cars, waiting for hands brave enough and hearts pure enough to find them. And so, the man once seen as nothing more than a struggling father became something greater, a symbol of what love and faith can build. His legacy wasn't the gold he stumbled across. His legacy was the family he built. That's how one broken-down car, bought with nothing but love, carried a family from struggle to legacy. If this story touched you, don't just scroll away. Hit that subscribe button and join us for more stories like this one. And remember, sometimes the smallest sacrifices hide the greatest treasures.